But anyway, they went on their high alert status, probably like some kind of battle stations. And he said what I heard was that there was a guy walking below the decks, and he absolutely freaked out because he said a man walked through a wall. Look, I'm just telling you what this guy said to me.
Yeah.
And the man who walked through a wall said to this sailor, A main is going to blow up tomorrow. So I said, what's A main? And he said, oh, it's the main ship's engine. I was like, okay. He said, so what they did is naval intelligence was on board, and all those guys went to A main. And he said to me, they discovered the largest fuel leak in the history of the USS Saratoga. And what he said to me, direct quote, one spark would have sent the ass end of our ship into the water.
Welcome back, Richard. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Right back at you, Sean. I can tell, like, we're dangerous, you and I. we're a dangerous combination because
I've known from watching you. Yeah, from watching you all this time, I'm like, this cat thinks very, very similar to me.
Well, that's good. Yeah, so we have a knack for good conversations. That's evident. So yeah, I'm glad to be here. This is going to be fun.
Okay. So we talked in the last episode about the national security state, and we could still talk many hours about that. But let's focus or narrow our focus on the USO phenomena, which you've done a huge amount of research. By the way, I'd love to see the Excel file that you put together. Because
well,
I am an Excel ninja, by the way, just so you know.
Okay, so I can make it available that way. I have it as a PDF. It's a free download on my website. Anyone can go to richardolanmembers.com. I should probably have a link to it on the front page, but if you just go to the search bar and type in USO spreadsheet, you'll get to the page, and it's a free download. So I set it up as a PDF. It's very large. It's 37 pages. We got all these sheets in there, and each page is massive. It's so big, but it's all readable. But yeah, I mean, I should probably just put it up the Excel version for people who want to play with it and crunch it. The problem with it, it's a very useful spreadsheet. I did a lot of work with it, but like, I'm not a spreadsheet guy. So there's very few numbers in there. There's a lot of words in there. So I don't know how many calculations someone's really going to be able to do, but I'm a total novice when it comes to spreadsheets. And yet I created this massive spreadsheet that I couldn't believe when I finished it, how big this thing is.
Do you have categorizations like nuclear, like different? Because I'm sure if you put that out there, you could probably, somebody who's good at AI could feed into an AI.
What I did is I created, so for every sighting in my USO book, I created roughly 15 categories for each case.
Yeah. Then you don't need numbers. All you need is the categories. You can run numbers.
So, but like the categories are like the time. Was it a day or night? What type of body of water? Was it in an ocean or was it in a freshwater body? And in the spreadsheet, I tried to break it down by specific areas. Like if it was in the Black Sea, that would be noted by an acronym. And if it was in the Indian Ocean, and on and on. And if it was in the Western Pacific or the Eastern Pacific, I tried to break it down. So there's information in there. I'm sure someone could figure out what to do with it. I mean, from my nomenclature, they would switch it up, and I wouldn't know how to do it. But
you already did the hard work. You did the hard work.
Yeah, so the spreadsheet's there. Yeah. Go to richardolanmembers.com, type in USO spreadsheet on the search bar. You'll get the damn thing. And it's fun. You can download it. But I should put it up as an Excel. I think I will. I'll do that. Right now it's PDF.
Yeah, and if you need some of those numbers crunched, just let us know.
All right. So good. We're in business here.
Okay. So what possessed you to start like meticulously going through all of these examples and that process? Because I know you had to buy a bunch of like out of print books and all kinds of crazy stuff.
I did all of that. This was a really fun project. I did it for 3 years. So I started this in 2022, and It started as a person on my website. I've got an awesome website, great people there, very active community. And someone asked me about a particular, it was a USO event from 1945 near the Aleutian Islands. That's actually one of the cases that's somewhat well known to researchers. So what I will often do for the folks on my site is I'll do a particular presentation on whatever subject for them. And I did it on this one. This is near Adak Island in Alaska. And I thought, I've been interested in USOs. Who isn't interested? Everyone is interested in this. It's inherently fascinating. And I thought, I'd like to see what other cases are there. Like, how many are there? I had no idea.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Baen Books at baen.com.
I had no clue. So I was familiar with the work of the late Carl Feind. I knew Carl a little bit. Carl passed away in 2018, and he wrote a book called Water UFO. And it partly about USOs, which, for those who don't know, unidentified submerged objects, so an underwater UAP or UFO. So some of Carl's book dealt with that, but Carl wrote about just the physical interactions between UFOs and water, whether it's fog or rain or snow. So there were a lot of things in there that I didn't really need to dive into, as it were. But anyway, I looked into Carl's work. I pulled some good cases out of there. He had an old website, which is now kind of not really functional, but at the time it was, and he collected a lot of cases there. And I went through the National UFO Reporting Center, which is a great website that I love. And I did a meticulous search through that site, Newfork. And then eventually I was able to get to the MUFON database. They gave me permission to go in there, which was very, very nice. I'm very grateful. And then just a bunch of other sources out on the web, just hunting these things, just searching, really. And then finding a 1978 magazine that was published in the UK that's been out of print. And I spent $50 to get that sent because I want these cases. And there were a lot of lots of out of print books and magazines that I ended up purchasing for this. But it was all just fascinating for me. What I wanted to do was to collect these cases were scattered all over the world. And I thought, how terrible. Like, there have been a couple of good books, a handful that have been written in the past on this subject. Not many at all. You could probably count them on the fingers of one hand, to be honest. Mm-hmm. So I thought, let's actually do this right. I thought that I could do this. And so it took just a lot of time to collect them. I collected just shy of 700 cases that passed my smell test. I weeded out so many, countless numbers more than that. But I collected, when I went to print with the first volume, I had a total of 672 cases that will fill the 3 volumes. Each of those volumes will be about 400 pages. And I may end up putting a few more in volume 3 before that goes to print, but essentially we're talking close to 700 cases, and they're amazing. I mean, they're amazing. There's military cases, there's civilian cases, there's every body of water I could imagine, every kind of situation. And then the crazy thing is my initial goal was I just wanted to breathe life into these dead cases that were totally forgotten, that were just incredible moments in the history of our planet, much less the history of someone's life. But then I ended up putting these statistics together, these categories, which I put in the spreadsheet, and I started looking for patterns, and I would find patterns that I had no expectation that I would find such things. But when you find these patterns, like, it made me think, this data is good. Like, I'm finding legitimate, interesting patterns that I feel could only have happened if the information I'm getting is by and large legitimate. And I'll mention one or two of them that strike me as noteworthy. One, I have mentioned this in a couple of other contexts, is the day versus night pattern, but it's quite important. And so what I noticed, when I would collect these cases, I just simply would note, did it happen when the daylight, under conditions of daylight, or in darkness? Very simple, very binary. Well, Earth is always half in daylight and half at night. So you'd think, well, if this is some kind of random event, then it should be 50-50. And it was 50-50 right up until the late 1960s. About half of all of these USO cases that I collected, turns out that half of them happen in the daytime and half at night. 51% happen in the daytime up until 1967. Now, I could say, well, maybe there's a bias there. But my only bias was that I was looking for cases that I thought had reason for me to say, yes, I think this is a true case. That was my only criterion. But after 1967, it goes to 75% nighttime, almost instantaneously. That did not seem like a random result. It went very rapidly and dramatically to 3/4 at night.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
Any technological breakthroughs on our end that may have caused that?
I wondered about this a lot. Well, there's a lot of things that happened during the 60s that could have prompted this. The 1960s was a decade where you start seeing a lot of satellites in Earth orbit. The first satellite, of course, was Sputnik in 57, but we really don't get going until the 60s with getting eyes up above us. So that's one thing. There were all kinds of technological developments happening during the 60s. The U.S. expanded its system known as SOSUS. This was a sound underwater surveillance. Yeah. Basically, our ears under the water to detect Soviet subs 1,000 miles away. And who knows what else were we detecting. So we were spreading our net, so to speak. And now I don't know of the specifics that like naval ships or military had as far as electronic detection. Obviously, we had radar, and we were probably working on new systems as well. I have to think things were becoming more sophisticated by then. And so I'm just guessing here, but because this looks like a behavioral change by them. So if you're coming out mostly at night, and by the way, with military, it was almost 90%. Since the late 60s, it's been, I think, 88% at night. So they can tell the difference between civilian and military. And military encounters are almost exclusively at night with USOs, as far as the cases that I have found. It's crazy. So why? I can only imagine you come out at night, you've got one big bright light. No one can see what the heck that is. There are electronic means of detection, yes, but maybe a little bit of stealth is better than no stealth. I don't know. But there's definitely this behavioral change. And it's interesting to ask why. I don't know why. The other pattern that I noticed in these, there are quite a few patterns, but one that I find really striking is instance of electromagnetic interference. And that is one thing I tracked. Mm-hmm. So the first case of EM interference that I found in the USOs was in 1951. There were cases of EM interference with aerial UFOs much earlier, but the first one that I found with water-based was in 51. So from that moment till today, EM interference has occurred in 9.6% of all the USO cases that I've collected. So almost 1 out of 10. It's a lot. Sounds like a lot to me. However, that number is doubled when we factor in military encounters. So they have a 20% rate, not 10%. Mm-hmm. And it goes quadruple in instances where people allege missing time or sightings of beings on the craft, which is a small, very small percentage. But in those instances, the individual is 4 times more likely to report electromagnetic interference. So communications go down, batteries die, compass goes crazy, whatever. And I just thought, that does not sound like a random result to me. There's something going on there. And it makes me think that EM interference is not simply an innocent byproduct of what they may do, but rather acting as a tool or a weapon when they want it to. That's what I think.
This is just a random question that came in my head. Forgive me, it's on topic maybe. I can't pronounce the name of the location, but the Turkey video, like the video in Turkey of the crowd.
Oh, Kumburgaz. I think that
Kumburgaz, yes.
From exactly. 2008, 2008, 2009.
Yeah, is that one of the cases that because it was over water, right? I don't.
Yeah, that was over water. No, that's not one of my cases. I could find a reason to include it. The reason it's not a case of mine is because I'm not aware of any of those objects entering the body of water there. It's the Sea of Marmara by Turkey. But it is true, you're absolutely right, that was seen over a body of water. That whole area is basically mostly water there by Istanbul. You have the Black Sea and you got on the other side. So no, I have not. That's a very interesting case, and I believe that case. I think that was a real UFO.
I mean, the video is the best video I've ever seen, and I'm not a video guy.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like there's two beings in there as well.
Yeah,
it looks like there's 2 alien beings in there. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, what about when you looked at all these cases, the nuclear factor, right? So, did they tend to show up with? So as an example, this is not a USO, but it's related in the sense that the Pascagoula case, right? The interesting thing about the Pascagoula case that nobody ever talks about is that in Pascagoula, they made nuclear attack submarines, right?
No, I did not know that. So that's good to know.
I didn't know that either. I was just like, that's interesting.
Well, now the Pascagoula case, that's in Mississippi, and there was the famous Pascagoula case in October 1973, so 52 years ago. I almost included that one because the object was seen right over the water, but I mentioned it. But a week later in Pascagoula, there was an actual USO event that I have included, and that'll be in the second volume of this study. So there was things going on there. There was like a kind of a mini wave of sightings in that region, and there was a lot of water-based activity going on there, matter of fact. Now, the nuclear, I want to finish.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to get at. Right.
There is no question in my mind that there's a nuclear connection here. So we all, most people have heard about the nuclear connection with the missiles above ground at Malmstrom and at Rendlesham, the 1980, that was a definite nuclear connection there. Mm-hmm. But with the water-based ones, yes, absolutely, yes. So some of the most dramatic, shocking, striking encounters that I found are military encounters dealing with the U.S. Navy and their nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. So in several cases, these objects clearly showed an interest in. So the first nuclear powered aircraft carrier was the USS Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which was back in the 1950s, and it served until the mid 70s, the FDR. So the FDR had a number of UFO encounters throughout its service history that I have found, at least five. Not all are USOs. But there was one from 1954 that was written about by a former officer of the ship, not just any enlisted guy, but he was an officer. Mm-hmm. He did not give his name. He wrote this years later and said, look, I was an officer aboard the vessel. I still have a family to worry about. I'm sorry. I'm going to tell you what I can tell you, and that's it. So he wrote this in like the 90s, I think, many years later. And he said, he wouldn't say what body of water the FDR was in. I've since learned it could have been in any body of water from the Mediterranean, down the Atlantic, down the South American coast, up the other side, because it was then going from its Mediterranean assignment for an upgrade and refitting in Seattle. And it was too big to go through the Panama Canal, so it could have been anywhere. It was 20,000 miles of sea lane there. But anyway, somewhere along that, the ship encountered a large cigar-shaped object descending from above, he said. And this guy tracked it by the minute. His description is like, literally like by minute 12, this happened. By minute 14, that happened. He was very precise. So anyway, the cigar comes down. The ship is obviously like, they're concerned about this. It goes back up, comes back down. Two discs emerge from the water smaller disks. They enter the large cigar-shaped object, which then tilts and goes into the water. This whole thing is like close to 20 minutes. The officer writing about this stated, our weapon systems were inoperable. They tried to launch aircraft. Aircraft would not launch, according to what he said. So that's one. That's one instance. Now, you mentioned nukes. That was a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. I don't think it had nuclear ordnance on it. I can't recall. But there's a lot of these, lots and lots. My favorite one is from 1971. It was the USS John F. Kennedy aircraft carrier. And they had just, this was on July 2nd, 1971 at 8 p.m. We've got the exact date. We got the time. We have the name of the man who wrote the case in. He was running the communication station at the time. He wrote about this. He gave his name. His name is Kopf, his last name. And he said at 8 o'clock, all the comms that I was operating just turned to gibberish. Nothing was working. I couldn't get messages out, and nothing was coming in that made any sense. At the same time, on the intercom, I heard someone screaming, "It's God, it's the end of the world." So that got his attention. He goes out to see what's going on, and he said there is this glowing orange sphere. He says it was as big as a beach ball held at arm's length, so pretty big. And it was just over the ship. I don't know if it was directly over or at an angle. That wasn't clear to me. He's watching this for about 20 seconds. He said there was another sailor, I don't know if at the time or later, that had to be sedated. People were freaking out over this thing, according to him. Then the ship goes to general quarters, battle station, so he has to go back to his communication station. So he only saw this thing for like half a minute. But comms were down for the next 20 minutes. And then he did not know how this thing departed. He said it was his understanding that weapon systems were not operable either. But I don't know if that was a definite thing. But that's a heck of a case. The ship had just done carrier qualifications, where they're like testing all their systems. How fast are we doing in the response to this, that, and the other? They apparently did very well. They were just north of Puerto Rico when this happened. And in the Bermuda Triangle, as it were. People like to laugh about the Bermuda Triangle. There's quite a few USO.
A lot of things disappear. Like they lose a lot of aircraft and stuff like that for whatever reason.
Hey, so what was I don't know what service you were in. Were you in Army, Navy? What were you?
I was in the Army.
The Army. So this will be in my second volume as well. I met with a Navy officer many years ago. I've always collected the story. It's an amazing story to me. So this guy was like, I remember talking to him. He was 6'3" and just rock solid. Like I looked at him, I'm like, this is the kind of guy I want defending my country. Like he just had his act together. He was an officer. By this time, he was doing recruiting. I don't think he was doing a lot of active duty stuff, but he was still in the Navy. So he's in my office, and for something that had nothing to do with UFOs. And he looks over and he sees walls of UFO books. And he's like, "Oh, I see you like UFOs." I'm like, "Well, I write about them." So he paused, and he eventually told me the story. And I firmly believe this man. I have not a shred of doubt. He said, in 1987, I was a signalman aboard the USS Saratoga. Mm-hmm. And they were he said, he chuckled at the time. He said, we were in the Bermuda Triangle when this happened. And they were part of the fleet that was doing maneuvers that was actually commanded by a famous Navy admiral named Jeremy Borda, who was famous because he sadly committed suicide sometime later during the Clinton years. But Borda was a dynamite officer from everything that I learned about him. Anyway, Borda was on another ship commanding this. So this man tells me, I was a signalman. So my job, I was out on the deck of the ship, and I guess you could say I was an expert in aircraft recognition. He knew all the light configurations, and that was part of his job. So it's midnight. He's out on the deck of this carrier, and it's pitch black, inky black. He said, whatever direction you looked at. And he said, and I'm looking on the horizon, and I see this light coming up. It looks like it came from the water. Coming up, stops. So he says to me, I'm looking at that thinking, I don't think I can identify that. He didn't know what that was. And he said, then it starts coming to our ship out of zigzag. And he's thinking, I really don't know how to identify this. So he's on whatever communication he had with the guys in the upper deck, I suppose. You see that? Yeah, we see that. What is that? We have no idea what that is. This is going back and forth. So they launch an aircraft, an A7. Is that the Warthog? A7. Navy
No,
had
definitely not. No,
not that. No, I'm getting them mixed up. The Avenger.
Yeah, maybe. I don't
I think
know
that's
too much
what
about naval.
I got mixed up here. They launch it. Anyway, what he said to me, this is like the craziest stuff here. He said the aircraft got close enough to this thing and it malfunctioned and the pilot had to eject from the aircraft. They recovered the pilot. He lived. Can you imagine? You're in the Bermuda Triangle. It's freaking midnight. There's a UFO coming towards your ship, and you're the guy who flies out to that thing. Someone had to be that guy. So this guy, and then you experience
Worse than that, as you're flying toward it, your engine just stops.
That's right, and you have to eject. So anyway, they got him. So this is not the end of the story. Then they sent a Tomcat, an F-14, one. And according to what the 6'3" Navy officer is telling me in my office, he's like, the Tomcat's coming up to this thing, and then suddenly this thing, whatever this thing was, takes off like a bullet, faster than a speeding bullet. Gone. He said that the F-14 would have had no chance of intercepting this thing. None. Zero. So the Tomcat came back, and that was that. And then there's a totally bizarre follow-up, which is only hearsay, because the officer who was talking to me did not experience this directly. But he said, oh, before that, I asked him, so did you write this on a report? Like, how did this go in a duty log? Like, how do you write this down? He says, that's a good question. He said, I was not authorized to get into any of that stuff. He said, I had very particular parameters as to what I was permitted. You sound like you know exactly what he's talking about.
He wasn't managing the ship's log. That's somebody else's duty, right?
Exactly. He said, look, I assume this went up the channel, but that I wasn't part of that. He was a young guy at the time. Anyway, he said the next day he learned, this is the scuttlebutt. Is it true? Is it not true? Who the hell knows? It's partly true, I think, because he said about an hour after this encounter, the ship went on a high alert status.
Yeah,
he didn't describe it as...
They lost a multi-million-dollar aircraft, right? Like,
hell yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess they went to general quarters. He didn't use that phrase, and I don't remember. This is many years ago. But anyway, they went on their high alert status, probably like some kind of battle stations. And he said what I heard was that there was a guy walking below the decks, and he absolutely freaked out because he said a man walked through a wall. Look, I'm just telling you what this guy said to me.
Yeah.
And the man who walked through a wall said to this sailor, A main is going to blow up tomorrow. So I said, what's A main? And he said, oh, it's the main ship's engine. I was like, okay. He says, so what they did is naval intelligence was on board, and all those guys went to A main. And he said to me, they discovered the largest fuel leak in the history of the USS Saratoga. And what he said to me, direct quote, one spark would have sent the ass end of our ship into the water. So they cleaned that up, and all was well. Oh, and the guy who walked through the wall just apparently turned around and just walked out. Look, I'm just telling you this is what this naval officer said to me. Hand to my heart. That's what he said to me.
Well, just throwing this out there, okay? So the Soviets had two classifications of beings that they encountered. The first were just biological, and the second were plasmoids. So just imagine, if you will, that, what's to say in the upper ionosphere there's not some sentient form of life that's made of ionized plasma, right? And maybe they're much more advanced than we are, and they can project, shape, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm speculating. I have no idea.
Look, there have been in the lore, in various reports and allegations, they are said to be able to walk through walls, at least at times. We don't understand how that works, but we have our own little Star Trek transporter fantasies, and we're working on these types of things. In fact, scientists are actively working on things analogous to transporter technology as we speak. So it's not impossible.
Yeah.
It could have been solved. Anyway, that was his story. Amazing story from 1987. And I never, ever had a moment of doubt listening to this man. I'm just saying like it is. I totally believed him. The way he told me, he wasn't jerking my chain. We were working in a business capacity at that particular time. And there was no reason for him to lie to me about that. I don't think. So, crazy
story. What's the scariest story? USO story that you...
Oh, wow. There's a few that are really, I'm just thinking off the top of my head.
Yeah.
There's
no one's ever asked you that? No one's ever asked you that one yet?
No, I think all of them are kind of scary, to be honest, when you put yourself in that situation. But one, I have told this one once or twice, but I'll say it here. This was a married couple. This is in my first volume here from 1955. So, just husband and wife. They like to do night fishing. This is like their thing. And they're in New York State, lower New York State, north of New York City. There's
Hudson Valley?
Yes. Yeah, this was in Hudson Valley.
Shocker. Yeah.
The name of the lake, I can't remember the name of it. I could look it up. But anyway, they're at this little lake, and I can find it real fast here, and I'm going to now because I want to find this damn thing. The Titicus Reservoir near North Salem, New York. So we're in summer of 1955. So their name is Bordas. That's their last name. Mm-hmm. So they go to the reservoir, they park their car, they get into a boat, they row about a mile. This reservoir is just 2 miles wide. It exists to this day. It's very beautiful. It was probably even more beautiful back then. So they're alone at this reservoir where there are no motorboats allowed. Only rowboats are allowed on this reservoir. So they're out there, they row a mile to the spot where they like to do fishing, and then they both see this orange light come up from the water. So we're not in the ocean here, we're just in a little man-made lake or whatever it is, and they see this come out and they're like, oh, that's very strange. And then they see these two like 30-foot wide, almost like fluorescent tubes, whitish, bluish, both coming out of the water. So they can't really tell, but they're thinking these are all connected to one thing. But it's dark, and they don't know. So the husband decides, I'm going to row out to this thing. You stay here at the shore. So the wife is staying at the shore. I've always wondered, like, what the hell did she say to him? Like, are you out of your mind?
This is why the life expectancy of males is much shorter than females. But
exactly.
Yeah.
But he starts rowing out. He's alone. It's like midnight. It's dead quiet. And he's rowing out. It's pitch black. And he's going toward this thing. And he's seeing that it's moving away from him. And for whatever reason, that's what freaks him out the most. So he says, okay, I'm done. I'm going to row back to my wife and we're going to get out of here. So they get back and then they start rowing. They have a mile to go back to their parking lot there. And the whole time, this light configuration followed them along. And not only was shining lights in their direction, but at times shining lights on them physically. So they were in the light by this thing. It didn't do anything to them that they know. They have no missing time that they noticed. They get to the end there and they get out and they get to their car. They could still see it from the parking lot of that reservoir. They were investigated in a lot of detail. There was a civilian group at that time that actually did an 8-page report on this. Apparently did very detailed interviews. And it's a crazy story, but I have no reason not to believe it. I don't think that's the scariest, but that's a pretty good one. Here's one. This is from 1825.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so this is the first great USO story. I have a couple that are earlier than this, but this is a genuinely great one. like, this could get like GOAT award, greatest of all time. So 1825, you have this British vessel of the Royal Navy. They are just returning from Hawaii. They had actually brought back the bodies of the Hawaiian king and queen who had died in the UK. They brought it back for proper burial. They've left Hawaii. They are now in the South Pacific. And they were going toward South America, but they cut down and they were going to go, I guess that's east. So they're down by the Cook Islands, very remote down in the Pacific there. It's 3:30 in the morning. So
witching hour, right? Or
it's dark. Yeah,
witching hour.
That's right. And according to the ship's doctor who wrote this in his log or his diary, which was published shortly thereafter, this man's name was Andrew Bloxham. We have his name, I have his book. You can find his book as a PDF. It's available. He describes this on August 12th, 1825. I don't think he was a direct witness, by the way. I think this is what he's reporting from the ship hands who were there. Mm-hmm. A glowing orange sphere, again, comes out of the water to an elevation, I think he said, of 30 degrees. So bright, you could pick a pin off the deck. He actually wrote that down. It drops down into the water again, and then came up a second time, and then descended again into the water. That's it, and that's all he wrote. And he had his diary that goes before that, diary that goes after that, all mundane stuff, or at least interesting stuff, being out at sea, and then this encounter, which he doesn't try to explain. He's like, this crazy thing happened at 3:30 a.m. He said it was red like a cannon shot, was his expression.
When these orbs, specifically these orange orbs, appear, do people report kind of like an Oz-like effect at all in any of these cases?
That's a really good question. I have not noticed. So the only things that I can quantify here is like, is there missing time? Is there EM interference? Or are there other weird things? And I would say yes, sometimes, but not necessarily more than other types. There's a lot of disc-shaped USOs. There's a couple of triangles that are out there. And there's, cigar-shaped ones as well. So I wouldn't say that these spherical objects are more than the others. And I should distinguish, there's two types that I've noticed. You got the glowing ones, but then there are spherical objects that do not glow, and they are seen as sometimes black, sometimes gunmetal gray, sometimes highly reflective, but they are literal spheres that are seen sometimes in daylight without a glow. And sometimes they do glow during the daytime and at night, but sometimes they do not glow. So I don't know, are these glowing spheres the same thing as the metallic looking spheres when they're not glowing, or are they something totally different? And I just have no way of knowing that. I can't tell.
Have you looked at any cases where like there are sonar returns and things like that, like different characteristics in submarines?
Yeah.
What are they like? I don't know where I heard this, but there's something like they detect cavitation but no sound, like stuff like that.
I don't know if I've gotten that specific in terms of the information that I have found, but I know with the sonar, you have US, you have had Royal Navy, you have Soviet Navy detecting these things with sonar. Yes, definitely. And an interesting one is the Soviet side of this. The Russians during the 1970s, especially late 60s, all through the 70s, were having really weird times with these things. I think they were not super clear, but I think in the Atlantic and I think in the North Atlantic, there's a lot of action going on there. That's a strategic choke point. So in the North Atlantic, I believe they would encounter these things that they called them, and I cannot pronounce this because I don't have Russian, kavakari, which is their word for frogs, which is the word to describe a croaking sound. And so they would detect a kind of weird croaking type of sound that sounded like frogs croaking. The thing about this, though, is that these objects could circle around a submarine, which is kind of.
This is spooky. This is.
Yeah. And they would come in, they could never identify. Like at first, they're wondering, is this the Americans? Are the Americans doing this? But they actually did a very formal study of this, and they quickly decided there's no way in hell this is the Americans. This cannot be. And so they didn't really know. They did not have hostile encounters with the Kavakari, but it still creeped them the hell out. And they certainly were having encounters for at least a decade with these. And I think by the early 80s, the Soviets were either intentionally shutting some of these programs down. I think that's probably it, rather than that the phenomenon just went away. I somehow doubt that that was the case. But they decided that these objects, whatever they were not hostile to them. Mm-hmm. I think one of them said, yeah, I think they look at us the way that we look at the fish in the water. Maybe that was, I think, one Soviet commander's supposition. There's a couple of, I have very few, unfortunately, very few stories concerning U.S. nuclear submarines with these objects. That's where really the action, I have to think, is really going on, but very few of those have come out. I have much more with surface vessels than with submarines, unfortunately. There are a couple of interesting submarine stories. One was told by UFO researcher Mark D'Antonio. I know Mark, and this is a story he's told many times, about time that he was a guest on a U.S. nuclear submarine. And understandably, he's been a little cagey about identifying the sub and where they were. And, I respect that, even as to when it happened. I suspect it happened in the 90s, but I could be wrong. Anyway, what he said is that he was, I've written this out and I just can't remember, but he was near a key operational area. And he hears one person talking to a commander about a fast mover in the water. And the XO comes over and he says, log it and dog it, which was their Navy expression for like, write it down and I guess forget about it, whatever, I guess. So Mark talked about this. He goes to the XO. This had to be hilarious because he wasn't even a Navy guy, but he studied UFOs. Like that makes, he says to the XO, well, sir, if you'd like any assistance in understanding this phenomenon. And the XO said, sir, are you having a good time here? Yes, sir, I am. You want to keep it that way? Yes, sir, I am. Okay. And he walks away. Mark is funny because he laughs about it because he realizes it was just kind of silly.
Yeah. In the Army, they would have just told you to get.
Yeah, exactly. I think this officer would be very polite.
They're more polite and aristocratic than,
He's very, very polite. But I certainly have no doubt about Mark's story there. And, he can't tell more. I wish he could, but I understand. But I don't have many submarine stories from the United States Navy, unfortunately.
I'm not surprised because that stuff, particularly on nuclear ballistic missile subs, right?
It's very secretive. You can understand why. It just is what it is. But, you think about what it has to be like for these guys in the submarines. So whether in the Cold War or today, because, there are hostile relations that the U.S. has still with Russia, even though, Trump and Putin are talking now, which is great, but things are not, hunky-dory, or with China. So you're in the water, it's black, you've got your scanners out there, you're looking for adversarial submarines, but then you run into these wild cards, these other things that go way faster.
You're also trying to avoid running aground into an undersea mountain. We lost a Seawolf submarine. I mean, not lost, but destroyed or heavily damaged the Seawolf submarine because they collided into a seamount. So you're trying to navigate that stuff too.
Totally. I mean, the guys doing submarine duty, they're a breed all by themselves, I think. So there's clearly a lot of elan and a lot of we're not going to talk about this. And, I totally respect that. But nonetheless, you have to imagine the drama that must exist, at least at times. You're down there. You're all alone. You get this signal, what is that? What is that? And they're not all Russian subs. Some of them are not Russian subs. Yeah.
Any final words for the audience? Aside from buying your 3 books, you can only buy 2 right now.
Go check it out.
I'll put the links below so they can.
Sure, yeah, great. Well, I love this book. This is the first of 3 volumes. So, and all the other 2 volumes are coming out this year. I originally had this absurd idea that I would publish all 3 at once, and that was absolutely not going to happen. But all of the cases, at least, are written, all for volumes 2 and 3. They're all done. But the books still need to be kind of polished and finished up. So I'm doing that presently. But no, this is a topic. The USO subject is one that is absolutely just captured my imagination. It's absolutely riveting. And it's a legitimate, powerful, important subset of the greater UAP subject. And it's not that, USOs are all that common as aerial objects are. They're not as common, but they are significant, and there are quite a few of them. I'm sure we're only getting a tiny sliver of what's actually going on down there. My feeling is that the oceans are not a bad place for an advanced society that is observing us to be hanging out. We cannot go down. You can't go down into most of these places, even our submarines. There's only so far down they can go.
Right.
That's right. And so, if you got a base down in the Puerto Rico Trench, well, you're pretty secure. And I think that if they're able to do that, and I suspect they are, the oceans are a very good place for them to be. It's actually protection from all kinds of things. I mean, weather fluctuations or from solar radiation that may not be right for you, all kinds of things. And certainly from these humans who are constantly pushing and exploring, and the oceans are still relatively good for them. So where this is going to lead is really a great question. I don't know, but I liken it to a dance. They see us, we're seeing them, and they're adapting to every new technological development that we engage in, that we do. I mean, now we're developing better eyes and ears to go further into the oceans and to record things far better than before. And, where will this end? I don't know. It's a very interesting back and forth little dance that's going on.
All right, my friend. It was an absolute pleasure, and anytime. And by the way, are you new events that you're going to be at? I know there's a few. You might as well rattle them.
Yeah, I do a couple from time to time. I'll be at Contact in the Desert at the end of May, early June. That's out by Palm Springs, California. It's a lot of fun. Nice hotel. I like going there, and I get to see a lot of really wonderful friends and people. I may do some other events from time to time over the year. I've traveled much less these last few years than in the past, but that may change.
All right, my friend. It was an absolute pleasure. Talk soon.
Same here.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and you can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's two options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site. And there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much and keep watching. I really appreciate it.